All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anderson McNall, and I'll be your session host today. Thank you guys for joining this session, When Two Become One, a case story of successfully modernizing two legacy SAS 9 environments to SAS Viya in the cloud. And we have Prasanna Gawade from SAS and Stuart Jardine from Aldermore Bank. And we'll try and leave a few minutes at the end for any questions that you guys have. So take it away.
Great, thank you very much. So we'll start with just some introductions. So I'm Stuart Jardine. I'm a risk infrastructure manager for Aldermore Bank. I'm also the SAS Viya platform manager. So throughout the project, I now take responsibility for making sure the platform's up and running and training and enablement within the environment. I've been working with SAS for at least 10 years, going on for probably 12 years at this point. And this is Prasanna.
Hi, I'm Prasanna Gawade. I'm a principal consultant with SAS UK, mainly focusing on migration and modernization team. I've been with SAS for 14 years, and in the past 8 to 10 years, I've been focusing on migrating our clients from legacy SAS 9 estate into Viya 4.
Great. And if you're interested, those QR codes there just take you to our LinkedIn profiles. If you want to connect with us and ask any questions later on, go ahead. So, this is going to be a story about our migration, about where we came from, about how we did the migration, and about what we've done since the migration. So we need to go back to the start and talk about early 2022 when we started down our modernisation programme. Let me give you a bit of background on Aldermore Bank. So the bank that I work for in the UK, so we're a mid-sized UK challenger bank. Born out of the financial crisis in 2008 to challenge the way that traditional banking worked. A lot of growth in the first 10 years, especially in savings, business-to-business lending, and specialist and commercial mortgages. In 2018, Aldermore was purchased by the First Rand Group. If you're not familiar with First Rand, they are the largest financial services group in Africa. They're about $100 billion and they're headquartered in Johannesburg. It's also worth noting that before purchasing us, First Rand had also purchased Motonovo Finance. So they're one of the top 3 car finance companies in the UK, and they're also a challenger in the way that they work. And when purchasing us, they moved Motonovo to become a subsidiary of Aldermore. Obviously, we've got such a diverse portfolio in a heavily regulated industry. We needed to make sure that analytics and forecasting were kind of key to everything that we do. So we needed to make sure that we had the best platform that we could available. So we had an exam question back in the day in 2022. There was a project where we were looking at the Motonovo Finance SAS 9.4 environment. So it's an on-premise SAS 9.4 environment. It had been designed for 10 users. It was pretty small and with not a lot of capability. And we had around 30 users a day using it. So as you can imagine, 30 users, designed for 10 users, it was running pretty slowly. We needed something new, we needed something modern. Because of the organisation that I told you about before, being bought out by First Rand, Motonovo becoming part of Aldermore, what we wanted to do was to be able to compare our data between the two organisations, but that wasn't possible with the 9.4 environment that we had. So there was no connectivity between Motonovo data and Aldermore data. And so this was the exam question, was how do we modernise Motonovo Finance and give them a brand new SaaS environment to make it work? I came onto the project in spring of 2022 as a SaaS subject matter expert to help them modernise the platform and to the pain of some of the project managers, I said, well, if we're doing it for Motonovo, why aren't we doing it for Aldermore as well? So we've got another big SAS 9.4 environment. Why don't we do both at the same time? So it significantly expanded the project. Very similar story, is a SAS 9.4 environment designed for 40 users, serving 60 users at the time, and we also couldn't access the Motonovo data. So at this point, the exam question becomes, how do we modernise both of these environments and move forward, connect all of our data together, make sure that it's powerful enough for everyone. So what we need to do is we need to move all of our code, all of our data from both environments into a single environment and connect up all of our data at the same time. And what we did was we chose to go with SAS Viya. So we went straight to SAS Viya 4. It's a cloud solution, and it helped us obviously address the connectivity issues we had with the data. And it was back in 2022 that we kicked off the project with SAS and with our partners Catalyze Data, who've helped us with a lot of our migration work along the way. So, Prasanna's going to talk to you about the journey and what we did along the way to get the migration done, and then I'm going to talk to you about a little bit after that about what we've done since.
Hello again. So yeah, how did we got there? From my past experience, what I have understood is there are two main factors that defines the success of any migration project. The number one is you need to make sure that every user on board at the client side is onboarded on this migration process. So making informed decisions everywhere and getting the feedback from them. And the second one is you need to plan your migration rightly so you know exactly what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and when it needs to be done. So we start with the planning using the SAS Content Assessment Tool. It's a series of applications that examines the characteristics of your SAS 9 estate. Each of these applications have got their own functionalities. At Aldermore, we started with the SAS 9 inventory, which basically inventorizes every single aspects of the SAS artifacts. So it basically inventorizes your mid-tier, your metadata server, and also the file system. Following the inventory, we start with the profile checks. So this goes beyond just the counts. It basically tries to understand how you're using the SAS application. In case of Aldermore, it was SAS Enterprise Guide, the most used SAS application that they had. And it gave us information as to how big are those Enterprise Guide projects, how many steps, how many tasks are in each of these Enterprise Guide projects, what are the ordered lists, what are the dependencies on each of these, and how we can migrate those EGP projects into SAS Studio Flows. Following that, we ran the SAS Code Analyzer, which basically analyzes the SAS code. It looks at keywords, including any hard-coded parts, any incompatibility issues within the code that we may find. Say, for example, if you have got X commands, if you have got DDE, which is Dynamic Data Exchange, it highlights all these and it gives us a kind of brief overview of what needs to be done in terms of making these code compatible when you move on to SAS Wire. All these applications and all the information was loaded into VA reports and was played back to Aldermore to allow them to make a defined, to understand the scope of the migration project. And it's an iterative process where we display all the information into the portal, the bank goes in, it makes this informed decision as to what the scope of migration would look like, and then we run the content assessment tool on the defined scope which the bank actually wants to move. So it's an iterative process. Once we have got the defined scope, we then move on to strategizing everything. So the strategy document is created, which kind of details of how each of these incompatible components would be made compatible when we move on to Wire 4, whether the migration is going to be a big bang approach or it has defined, or is the migration going to be happening in phases, multiple phases with X number of EG projects being migrated. So everything was put into a strategy document. And then it was estimated, and it was then a plan was put on the paper. The content assessment tool is it's available on the website. You can download it for free, and it gives all the information that you would require for the planning of the migration. Following the content assessment tool, the next tool that we use is the migration estimation calculator. Now, this is an in-house tool that we have developed internally within SAS UK based on the feedbacks that we have received from several migration projects. So it's become pretty robust enough to tell us exactly how long will my migration happen, how long each of these tasks would take. One of the basic inputs for these tools is your analysis from the content assessment tool. So you can feed into the tool all these metrics around how many transformations you have within the SAS 9 estate, how long each of these transformations would take us to migrate. So the tool has got like a lookup which tells us if you have got X transform, this is a medium transform which would take X number of days or X number of hours. So we feed all that information within the tool. It comes up with a nice estimate of how long it's going to take for us to do the migration. It can come up with an estimate based on the time as to a number of days. It can also come up with an estimate in terms of the cost as well. You can also define various areas as well. So, how long your data migration would take, how long the content migration would take. Depending on the metrics that you enter into the tool, you can also identify the testing approach, how long you need to do your testing, whether it's a unit testing, your integration testing, operational acceptance testing, etc. So, the tool basically it gives you kind of a complete overview of how big the migration is going to be, so that you can make an informed decision with the business. You can agree the timelines with the business as to how long this is going to take. Again, it also has got defined roles in it, so you can identify what are the key resources that you would need for migration, whether you need data consultants, whether you need migration consultants, how big your testing team should be, any users that you would need from the configuration side. It will help us identify all the key resources required across the major milestones of the project. Once we have got the plan and the estimates in place, we start with the migration execution. So, Catalyze Data was one of our key partners on the projects that helped us migrating all these enterprise guide projects into the SaaS Studio flows. The initial migration started with configuring the environment. So, when we say we configure the environment, it means we implement a security model. We make VPN connections to the on-prem databases. In this case, we had two databases, a SQL Server and Oracle. The other thing that we had to look into was also in terms of the data migration, because there were encoding changes. The current platform in the SAS 9.4, the encoding was Latin 1, whereas Wire 4 is UTF-8. So, we had to make sure that the data migration is compatible against the UTF-8 encoding. Aldermo had around 7 terabytes worth of data, and this was a SaaS hosted platform on Microsoft Azure. So, we used Azure Data Disk to move the data from on-prem system onto the cloud. Data migration was again performed using the SAS Data Migration Manager tool. So, this is again an in-house tool that we have built internally within the organization, which identifies the incompatibility issues between different encodings. It correctly identifies any multi-byte characters that you have in Latin 1 or other non-UTF-8 encoding, and basically adjust the column lengths when you are migrating your data into Wire 4, which has got a UTF-8 encoding. Next step involves the bulk export of the enterprise guide projects. So, when we did a bulk export, we had to make sure that any compatibility issues that we had identified when we wrote the strategy document, all those changes were made at the time of bulk export. Again, because this migration was executed in phases, in different phases, we also had to make sure that there is a dependency between these phases has been maintained when we do the migration as well. In terms of testing, again, we kind of partnered with Catalyze Data to come with a comprehensive list of what has been changed with every step of the migration. Whether it was the transforms that were changed as part of the refactoring, or the hardcoded paths that had to be changed, which kind of lined up to the new system. All these things were recorded, and again it was kind of with a peer review checklist. The checklist kind of acted as a handshake between the unit testing team and the UAT team. So, all this information was recorded in the checklist, which kind of was passed on to the UAT. Any defects that came out of UAT were resolved and then submitted back for testing within the testing team. In terms of recognizing benefits, whilst we migrated all the SAS Enterprise Guide projects onto SAS Studio Flows, everything was running on compute. We saw the performance efficiency was improved by around 25%. Aldermo has gone ahead and they have basically given users to self-service the data by launching 42 visual analytics dashboard reports. Some of the processes which were scheduled manually on the old SAS 9 system, they were able to schedule these processes using SAS Scheduler on the new Wire system. And I guess one of the most important achievements I would say was Aldermo went ahead, because all these studio flows were running on compute, They did their own analysis and started migrating some of their compute workloads onto the CAS sessions, enhancing the CAS compatibility, which basically got them the improvement of almost around 400% in one of their longest running steps. Now, with this migration piece, it's not one man's army. There are several key parties involved, several teams are involved with this. And also with this migration project, we had a very robust support model at Aldermore. So we had the enhanced premium support team, which basically looked at all the SLAs and all the important updates that were coming on the platform. We had Catalyze Data, who was the partner which helped us in implementing the migration work. Then we had SaaS Application Management Service team, which was helping us to onboard users, making sure everyone has got in the right groups, the access control has been managed. And then finally, we had the SaaS Managed Services team. This was the hosting team, which basically made the platform available. They were looking at the backups, restores, making sure the DR environment is set up correctly. So again, it's a combined effort of lots of people available on the project, and again, with a robust security model, it was helped us to deliver the migration. Stuart, wrapping up.
Thank you, Prasanna. So obviously lots of technical stuff had to go into moving our data, to moving all of our code, to all of the refactoring, but the one thing that we haven't talked about is people. You know, you've all got kind of end users, you might be end users. Moving from a SaaS Enterprise Guides to a SaaS VIA is not a small thing, you know, and people don't like change. So the one thing that we decided to look at was to have a VIA launch day. So when we started going live with SaaS, we kicked off a day-long session that we ran remotely across our 3 main sites. So we had 60 plus total colleagues from Aldermore and Motonovo combined. We ran it remotely across 3 sites, and we were joined by some staff from Catalyze and from SaaS. We kicked off the day doing some demos, showing how SaaS VIA worked, showing off some of the things that you can do with SaaS in the future. And then we thought it was important in the afternoon to let users get hands-on as well. So we ran a hackathon in the afternoon where we basically split users into 3 groups, and we allowed them to either have a go at Visual Analytics, or to start playing with SaaS Studio, or even start building models in SaaS Model Studio, along with the support of Catalyze and SaaS, to try and get people excited. And we had some really good feedback from that day, and especially from the hackathon. Allowing people to get hands-on is a very nice tool that you can use when you're going through these migrations. After our launch day, we needed to get back to BAU, get our business as usual stuff done. So we went with the Big Bang approach. We moved everything onto VIA in one go. We didn't do any parallel runs, and we needed to make sure that everything was running the way that it needed to be running. As Prasanna pointed out, we saw an instant uplift in the way that our code was running. So we were getting benefit from that, but we needed to make sure that all of our processes could be running exactly the same way. A few things that needed to change that you might want to look out for when you're doing a migration. Lib name statements, obviously your file and folder structures will change, so making sure that those things are updated. ODBC configurations, those sorts of things might change that you need to change in your code as well. Your include statements, where you're calling other pieces of code, you might need some extra attention if you're moving from Windows to Linux. There's a slight different change in the way that you need to write those. Permissions and security, that can be quite challenging when you're dealing with VIA on a Linux environment, and there are some challenges, so spend your time thinking about that security model, how you want to give users access. And one thing that's big for our users that we've had to kind of get them used to is, with it being a hosted managed service that we have with SaaS and being cloud-based, they can no longer export their files directly onto our file system, so they're having to download files through the browser. What we've done is we've set up a managed file transfer process that uses an SFTP server to move files, to try and kind of allay some of their fears that way, but that's one thing that they had to get used to. One big thing that we heard during the migration was, I really like Enterprise Guide, I like the way that it works, I don't want to move to a new UI. We found that SaaS Studio is very similar to Enterprise Guides. There's a few kind of things that look visually different, but the way that it works is very similar as well. So once we started getting back to business as usual, we started thinking about what else we can do, and we needed to make sure that we educated people so that they knew what tools we had. So visual analytics. How can we automate reports straight into visual analytics? I'm sure there are plenty of people out there right now that have SaaS programs that will export to Excel, and then that Excel will be generating graphs, and those graphs will be copy and pasted into PowerPoint. We wanted to get away from all of that and start building visual analytics graphs that will come straight off the back of your code. So we started running training sessions on getting people to do that. We wanted to know whether or not we could use Model Studio to build challenger models for our existing models, so we've started looking into that as well. Model Manager is another product that we have, and we wanted to know whether or not we could use that to hot swap models in and out. And also we wanted to know what else we could do with APIs. APIs is a new thing to us that we haven't used a lot of, and we've actually spent some time looking into APIs, and if you're interested, I'm actually speaking again tomorrow at 2 o'clock about some work that we've done on APIs, so come along and I'll give you some more information that we've done on that. So alongside the benefits that migration gave us, one thing to consider is that when you're moving into a new environment, even if you're not moving from two separate environments like we did, it gives you a really nice opportunity to take a step back and look at what you have, because you have to assess all of your code, you have to assess all of your data, and it gives you an opportunity to really get an oversight, where we ended up finding, thousands of tables hidden in hundreds of subfolders, and bits of code that weren't being managed properly, and we were able to take a step back and kind of review that estate and build some proper rules and around the way that people should work, so we've got a much more controlled environment. So yeah, at the end of it, we became one of the first banks in Europe to fully migrate, possibly the first bank, but I don't know if that was ever confirmed, one of the first banks in Northern Europe to migrate entirely everything from 9.4 onto VIA. So obviously we've done our migration now. We're about 18 months down the line, but we don't want to stop there and say we've got everything in SaaS Studio, everyone's going back to the way that they're working. We want to think about how we move forward. So we work really closely with SaaS customer success. I've heard quite a few people talking about the customer success teams. So I wanted to highlight a few things that we've done with customer success, and point out why they might be useful for you when you're thinking about your migration process. So we like to engage with customer success not only to make sure that training and things are doing what they're supposed to be doing, but to get people enthused about using SaaS and about showing them what we can do with SaaS. So we like to run social events, and one of the standout events that we've done is we actually had a cricket match. Now I know what you're thinking, that's probably the most British thing you've ever heard, that we all got together and played cricket. But I will say it was our South African CRO and the South African customer success manager that organised it, so but it was a brilliant day. We went over to SaaS's Marlow office. We had a kick-off session where we talked about all the good things we've been doing with SaaS and what the opportunities were that we could do, and then we had a great game of cricket in the afternoon, and we built some great contacts, and I wouldn't possibly be so indiscreet as to say who won the match, but I have said they do want a rematch pretty soon. So. Aside from doing great fun things like that, these sorts of events are brilliant. I can't recommend enough the way that you can network, get to know people from SaaS, and pick up those relationships afterwards. Me and Prasanna have worked on some great things. Rajiv, who I'm speaking with tomorrow, we've worked on some great things as well. And the API work that I'll be talking about tomorrow, that was actually kicked off at SaaS Innovate on Tour in London last year. So just make the most of these sessions. We also worked with our customer success manager going over to the Marlow office to really drill down into what we wanted from a customer success plan and how we wanted to tailor it to the way that Aldermore works and what our priorities are. So we took a day out to really kind of look through our priorities and dig into each work stream and understand how SaaS could help us, and they have helped us a lot. And so off the back of that, we've set up a load of good things that help our users. So we have regular Ask the Expert sessions. You guys might be aware that there are Ask the Experts global sessions that you can find on online webinars, but we actually have personalised ones where our customer success manager organises for experts to speak directly to our team, which can be great because it's a smaller group and you can ask questions that are more relevant to your business. So get involved with those sorts of things. We have a monthly forum where users come along and talk about any problems they have in the platform, anything they want to do differently, but we also showcase best practice and provide any updates on any other things that are going on. And one thing that we've started fairly recently off the back of the customer success work is what we're calling office hours or drop-in sessions. We've found that one of the things that users do a lot of, and I know that I've been very guilty of in the past, is rabbit holing. When I get into my code, I think I know the problem and I spend 5 hours digging into my code and figuring out the problem, trying to figure out the problem, and then I'll stop and I'll go and have a conversation with someone, and whilst I'm explaining the problem to someone else, I figure out what I've done wrong. Those open hours sessions are absolutely priceless for that. I essentially get to sit on a webcam, someone comes along, tells me their problem, solves their own problem, and then goes away happy. It solves problems so much quicker, so having those in the calendar is really good as well. So one thing I did want to touch on as well is growth horizon. So you might be thinking, should we migrate to VIA? And this is one thing that we considered when we were weighing up whether or not to do the migration exercise. Before the migration, we were spending a lot of time, protecting what we had, making sure our code was running properly. We talked about how the environments weren't powerful enough, but we were trying to get them to run as quick as we could. During the migration, you start thinking about, getting the code running smoother, start using things like CAS. And now that we're fully into VIA and we're 18 months down the road, we're innovating a lot more. We're starting to use visual analytics reports. We're starting to really push forward and automate things. We're starting to get code running in a way that it wasn't before, but also set up scheduling jobs that mean that we can do much more interesting things rather than sit there, run a code, wait for it to finish, and then look at the results and then run your next bit of code. It's the interesting stuff you guys want to be doing. It's the same for us. So the last thing I think I'm going to touch on is thinking about what we're going to do now with SaaS VIA. So I've already kind of covered this a couple of times. Visual Analytics it's a great tool for building visual reports, and for those of you out there that are trying to sell SaaS to the rest of your companies and get people excited, what we found along the way was Visual Analytics is a brilliant way of doing it. You can talk to the cows come home about my code's running faster, the user interface is great, the data's great, and people tend to just kind of glaze over with this stuff. But if you put a flashy report in front of them that they can click through and they can dig into things, they go, oh, this is really exciting, and that leads to more interest and that leads to getting things done. So Visual Analytics is something that we're really pushing to get users using. Model Studio, we've been constantly speaking to SaaS, and I think that this is something that I'd highly recommend, is that if there is something you want to be doing in SaaS, speak to your customer success manager and work with them to find out when they can set up sessions for you. We've had quite a few sessions to talk through how Model Studio works. We've talked to the product managers for Model Studio as well to understand if it fits our need, and we're looking to start building models in the next 3 months that will be challenger models for our existing models. Model Manager, we're going to be migrating our entire model inventory into SaaS VIA and hosting it within SaaS Model Manager, with the potential that we'll be looking at Model Risk Manager in the future to sit on top of that as well. One of the big things that we're kind of excited about, but it's still a kind of ongoing project, so I don't have a whole load to go into at the moment, is financial crime. Since the success of our VIA migration project, we have started a financial crime project where all of our financial crime prevention in the bank is going to be moving on to SaaS VIA. So we're going to be using SaaS Intelligent Decisioning and Visual Investigator. We're starting off a project that is starting to wrap up the first phase now, where all of the new applications on the bank for KYC will be done through SaaS. So using Intelligent Decisioning to process the information coming into the bank, and using Visual Investigator as the front-end tool that all of our analysts will be using to do KYC for the bank. Synthetic data, I would say this is something that came from Innovate on Tour last year. Myself and my boss heard all of these great speeches about Data Maker and said, we'd love to do that. How do we do synthetic data? We think it could really help us in the way that we build models. And again, just reaching out through our customer success manager, through our account manager, we've had some great kickoffs, and you might know Professor Ian Brown's very kind of close on the synthetic data. We've been working with him, and we've actually started doing some synthetic data generation within the bank, and we should be looking at getting results on that within the next 6 months to see if we've been able to improve our models. And just another shameless plug that we are doing some stuff with APIs and the way that we control SaaS, and I will be speaking on that tomorrow if you want to come along to that session as well. So this is all the stuff that we're going to be doing now that we've got SaaS VIA embedded. And that's our story. So, what questions does anyone have? None. Brilliant. Okay,
Yes,
no,
nothing with
there's
the
a
mic.
microphone coming over.
So you started in 2022, ending in May 2023. That's
Yeah.
in my mind, it's pretty fast.
Yep.
But since you transitioned to Studio, would you rather, if SaaSUG was supported at that time, have gone to EG?
Yeah.
And the thing is that any of these products, there's certain pieces that matter a lot to certain individuals. So
Sure.
something might really work well for a group of users, but boom, something got lost.
Yeah.
You know?
No, 100%. And it's a conversation I've had a couple of times with SaaS guys in the last couple of days. It was a relatively recent announcement that Enterprise Guide is now supporting SaaS VIA. And kind of tongue in cheek, I say, I hate you guys for doing that, because I spent 9 months telling my users, you're not allowed Enterprise Guide anymore, but it's fine because we're getting all these flashy new exciting tools, but you're not allowed Enterprise Guide anymore. And now SaaS have said, we're keeping Enterprise Guide. Oh, come on. But no, I get it. People don't like change, and if you can run your code in Enterprise Guides, I think it's great. We haven't gone back to using it just yet. I haven't had enough people shouting at me that they want it back. So people have found their way in SaaS Studio, and because of the way the infrastructure works, I would say that sitting in SaaS Studio, if you can, is better. But I think I would have loved to have been able to say, just keep doing what you're doing in Enterprise Guide. Anything else?
I have a question about creating reports that you take to Excel. You said you have to FTP it.
Yeah.
We're in the process of making everything dynamic.
Sure.
We're tired of the human intervention because we have
Yeah.
too many reports we create.
Yeah.
Is there a way to dynamically create it so SAS automatically creates the reports into Excel?
Yeah, I mean, so Prasanth's probably got a lot more information, but I'll tell you about a couple of things that we do. So we do use the SAS Excel plugin. So that, when you open the plugin, refreshes the data, and then you've got your data sitting in Excel ready for you. We've also got some scheduled jobs that run kind of overnight that will export data into a folder sitting on our SAS environment. They are then picked up by managed file transfer jobs, dropped onto an SFTP file transfer server, and then Aldermore has a job that picks up that file and moves it to wherever we need it on our side. So there's no human intervention at all on those pieces, and the reports are done. One of the other things that we've started doing recently as well is using SAS to send emails. So we will generate the files in an automated process overnight, generate an Excel spreadsheet. One of the really clever guys on my team is actually, he's built himself a template with loads of beautiful graphs and things on it, and then he exports his data into that Excel template and then uses SAS to send that on an email out to all of his users. So again, it's scheduled overnight, and there's no human intervention on those as well. I don't know if there's any other bits you want to...
No, I think as you said, we can create all those custom steps and procedures to automate all these processes. It's just that depending on the requirements, what you have, we can either do that in Studio or in VA. That can be done.
Anything else?
I guess no questions.
Cool. Good.
Thanks
all.
everyone. Thank you.